Hi all, what you're about to see is an interview that I did with a Ukrainian student in March of 2022, less than a month after the war in Ukraine first started. There's no video, and a lot has changed since then, but this will be a really good first-hand account of an example of what it was like to be a Ukrainian in the first few weeks after the war's beginning and what the emotions were felt by them. Like I said, a lot has changed since then, but I really hope you enjoy and take the time to listen to this interview. More to come. Enjoy.
First question, just most important, how you doing? How's your family? How are things? I know, that's not an easy question nowadays, but
Course, of course, it's a tough situation. There's very few words I can describe that I can find to describe how what we're going through right now. Um, the last 3 weeks has been close to hell. We are fighting for our life back home. As a student in Edinburgh in United Kingdom, I'm very privileged, to be here. But at the same time, I feel kind of helpless because you know
mm,
I feel like I'm not helping my country when they need me the most. I want to go back home, for example, be with my family, help the war effort, so the least I can do from here, from my perspective, is to raise awareness,
mm,
raise humanitarian aid, humanitarian donations, etc. And the way I see it is that's the least I can do to, from out here. Yeah.
yeah. And how's your family right now?
So thankfully, everybody's healthy and well. I'm lucky. My family come from West Ukraine, so our region's not impacted by the fighting as much. Of course, there's air sirens. They bombarding every city, including cities in Ukraine, in West Ukraine. So of course, you wake up every day, calling your parents, calling your friends, making sure everybody's safe, making sure everybody's doing well, which is you wake up, that's the first thing on your mind.
Mm, well, you know, support. I feel helpless too. I wish there was more that I could do. I wish there was more that we could do.
Yeah, it's
But you mentioned supporting the cause, giving donations. There's one organization in particular that we're gonna ask people listening to donate. Do you want to talk
yeah.
about?
So the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain, AUGB for short, they set up. They were set up after in 1946 after World War II, and it just represents all the Ukrainians living abroad in UK. And so they set up an emergency appeal to raise money for humanitarian aid. So since the 24th of February, we have 3 million people, Ukrainians, that have left the country. Many more internally displaced. So, for example, from cities like Kiev, from cities like Kharkov, Mariupol, the ones that can have fled to West Ukraine. So there's a huge humanitarian crisis. I would call it a disaster even. Many people have left their homes and are refugees now. And what Association of Ukrainians in the UK, they are raising funds to help support the humanitarian effort. They raised 2.2 million pounds so far. Their goal is 2.5 million pounds. I think we can get there. I urge everyone listening to donate there
Mm,
because Ukrainians need support more than ever right now. We feel helpless, and please do not be indifferent. Put yourself in our shoes. Put yourself in these families' shoes. They don't have a home right now. They don't know when they can return. They are going through the worst possible scenario in their life, which is they have to rely on other people for help and on their kindness. And we have to help any way we can. So please, guys, please raise as much money as we possibly can. All the proceeds go for the humanitarian effort. You help buy medicine, you help buy food, you help buy sleeping bags, etc. We need to look after these people any way we can.
and we'll put the link in the description so you can find it uh, very easily. Um, One quote that comes to mind that I saw recently was Albert Einstein said, "Evil disasters don't happen by evil people alone. It's when people are different and don't stand up
Exactly,
to,
and
to
that's what got us here to this whole situation. In my opinion, this is a war between good and evil, and evil is, Putin has been in charge for 20 years. In my eyes, he is the reincarnation of evil, and we have sat on the side and let him get away with too many things to the point where we are here now. And
All right. Well, let's rewind back a little bit. We'll try to do this as chronologically as possible. So, tell me, where exactly in Ukraine you were born?
yeah, so I was born in a town called Lutsk in the northwest of Ukraine, in the region of Volyn. We border Poland on our west and Belarus on our north. I was born into a large family. There's seven of us, even larger extended family. So growing up was a great time. There's a lot of siblings, a lot of outdoor activities.
Do you have the names of your siblings?
Of course. So I have an older brother called Ihor, and three sisters. Nadia, my older sister, and I'm a triplet. I have two sisters my age, Vera and Lubov, and their names translate to actually the sisters. Nadia is hope, Vera is faith, and Lubov is love.
Oh,
Yeah.
very nice. And are both your parents also from Lutsk?
Yeah, so all our family history is from the region of Volyn, not specifically from Lutsk. My dad comes from a village, a very tiny village in Volyn, and my mom also comes from a even smaller town in Volyn as well. They met, and Lutsk is like
Big city.
the big city, 200,000 people. It's not a big city, but of course, that's where my parents worked, etc. The city I grew up in, went to school. I have great memories from that. Yeah.
And before we go into your childhood, I just want to ask you a little bit about your, extended family. Your grandparents and relatives, because obviously the Ukrainian conflict with Russia has not started in 2022.
Of course.
It's been going on, since the Stalinist eras and um, World War II. So, what stories have you heard from your great grandparents or grandparents or anybody that?
Absolutely, yeah. So, our whole family history, as I said, is from Volyn. My great grandma on my mom's side, she actually lived before World War II on the Polish side of the border. So, after World War II, and the borders shifted, many Ukrainians on the Polish side of the border were forced to go to Ukraine, and many Polish people on our side of the border were displaced into Poland. It was a Stalinist policy. So since then, Ukrainians have suffered a lot under Stalin. I can go back to Holodomor in the 1930s, a man-made famine. It's a genocide where 8 million Ukrainians died of starvation, predominantly in the East Ukraine. And that was the root of many, many problems that we're seeing today, because that area in East Ukraine had to be repopulated, and Stalin sent in ethnic Russians to repopulate that area. So I would say that is the start of the East-West divide in Ukraine between ethnic Russians and pro-Russians, if you like, and pro-Western Ukrainians that live in the West Ukraine. This is where I grew up. So for a long time, there was a divide, and for a long time, our country was split into two. If you look at the river, if you look east of the river, there's pro-Russian side. West of the river is pro-Ukrainian side. This was growing up. Of course, since the war, many people united, and we are mainly Ukrainians. Of course, we have different views, etc. But since the war, especially since this war started in 24th of February, the whole country united. Everybody's Ukrainian. We have a common enemy right now, and that is Putin. Actually did more to unite Ukraine than any Ukrainian politician did over the last 20 years. and that is beautiful to see, actually. And I hope that after the war ends, we keep this unity, and we rebuild our country and stay united, because we are strong united. When we are divided, that's when we are vulnerable to outside interference.
Mm. So, you mentioned your great grandmother. She was living in Poland. Did you ever meet her?
Yeah, so we actually lived in the same village. She was just a 5 minute walk from my house growing up.
Mm.
So we'd spent like not a lot of time, but of course, I got to meet her. I got to hear some interesting stories from before.
Mm.
Um, uh, you know, the amount of wisdom that gets passed down the generations is, and the amount of personal stories. I'm very very lucky to have
Mm.
met and spoken to her, shared time with her, and grew up with her around me.
So you mentioned your great grandmother. Do you have any stories or memories from that your great grandfather or grandfather has told you about growing up?
Yes, so I mean, I heard the most interesting stories from both my grandfathers, both on my dad's side and on my mom's side. To give you an idea how much Ukraine and Ukrainians have suffered under Stalinist regime in the Soviet Union, um, I can, for example, my granddad was born to a large families. There's 7 kids of them. He was the youngest one. He was born 1952. So just as Stalin died. Um, he, when he was 2 years old, his older sister, who was a teacher at the time in a Soviet school in Ukraine, the Soviets came in, and they took the teacher away from the class, and she was never seen again, for example.
Oh my God.
And hearing this sort of stuff, these are the stories that I get told. And so us, um, people in the West Ukraine, we grew up viewing the Kremlin and their policies as we see them as the eternal oppressor. To be honest, this sort of vision isn't shared by the whole country. So on the East, they were more pro-Russian, if you like to call it that. But on the West, we remember the atrocities that the Soviets committed, and we don't forget these, and we understand what's going on right now is a continuation of this genocide on Ukrainians. They tried for centuries to erase our culture, to erase our language, to erase our identity, and it has failed. It has failed in the Soviet Union under the most brutal oppression, and it will fail this day. I am completely confident
Mm.
Ukraine will survive, and we will prosper.
All right. That's very moving. I want to ask you now, if you could tell me about, your childhood and what it was like growing up in Lutsk and, just day-to-day things and positive memories that you have now looking back.
Of course. So I grew up in a village. We very very traditional family. I would go. My grandma's and granddad lives right opposite, down the street. So I have a lot of memories. Like helping my grandma farm. Look after the chicken, the sheep. This is when I'm like 5 years old, for example. So I spent a lot of time outside. I spent a lot of time, doing these household tasks. You know, One of my favorite things to do was to collect honey from bees with my granddad. He has a bee farm.
Wow.
And so, the traditions are ingrained in our culture. Uh, so this is when I was a very little kid. This sort of stuff I won't forget ever in my life, because since I moved to the UK, it's a very different life here. It's a you know much more urbanized, if you want to call it that. My other memory, we had a holiday house in Crimea. We'd go, especially when I was a very little kid. I'd go every year for 6 months, every year from 2004, And from when I can remember, honestly, till 2014, I went every year. And Crimea is a very beautiful island. It's, in my opinion, the most beautiful location in Europe. And since 2014, when Russia came in and annexed it, um, I can't go back ever since. I haven't been back. It's something that's torn away from you. It's a little piece.
What happened to your home? What did just Russian?
So, in order to make the annexation accepted and popular within the Russian community and also accepted by the Ukrainian community, the Kremlin promised that they would just transfer all the private houses to the same people under just Russian law, under Russian jurisdiction. So, luckily, nothing happened. It's still in Crimea, but we can't go visit it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were very young, well, I guess let's do it this way. When was the first time you can remember that in your consciousness the idea of the Russian and the Ukrainian conflict
Mhm.
and really entered into your head and was like, has it been always in your headspace, or is this something? Was there a time that you remember that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2004, Ukraine had a revolution against the rigged election where the pro-Russian candidate won. This was the first time I remember where there was, it was called the Orange Revolution, and to show support for the revolution, you'd dress in orange. Anything orange you have, you come out and you showed your support for the revolution. And my parents, of course, were for the revolution. We wanted Western leaning government, a pro-Western approach. And so I remember going on the streets in orange hats, orange gloves, and that was the first time. I mean, obviously, I didn't comprehend anything back then. I was a little kid, but that was the first time I started to, you know,
Think about these,
yeah, you start to just understand more about your country's situation. When it got fully ingrained was during 2014, the Euromaidan, and that was the revolution against a pro-Russian government, very corrupt government, and they turned their back onto EU integration. They refused to sign a free trade agreement with the EU in the last minute, and initially only students came out and we demanded that we go and sign this agreement. The police beat the students up, beat the protesters up, and the next day it was a pushback effect. It was thousands and thousands of people came, and now people were pissed off not only because they wanted EU integration, but now we see the real face of the government, the oppression that you can't speak out against the government. So this effect backfired. Beating up the students was it gave spark and new life to the revolution. For anyone that wants to learn about it, go and watch Winter on Fire on Netflix. It's a very interesting documentary, and again, this is a root cause of what's happening right now was Euromaidan revolution, and that was when it was fully ingrained into me about the conflict of Ukraine leaning westwards into EU integration, etc., and Russia trying to hold us back at any cost and interfering.
And from that point on, did you feel like this cause was something that was very in the forefront of your mind, and every day, not every day, but most times you'd be thinking, Ukraine has to push Russia away and be independent, and
Yeah, so I mean, straight after the revolution ended on 21st of February, when the president fled, Russia came into Crimea 2 weeks later, at the start of March. And actually, today is the 8th-year anniversary of annexation of Crimea into Russian Federation. They did a big rally in Moscow today to show support for the annexation, show support for the war, show support for the Putin regime. And so, since Russia took Crimea, everything changed. To be honest, our country was in a state of war because after they took Crimea, they started funding all these so-called separatist movements, these so-called separatist republics. And summer of 2014 was a very, very difficult summer for Ukraine, for my family, and the next 2 years was a very, very tough situation in Ukraine. You'd go back from UK and you enter the country, and you can instantly feel the tension. You can feel this anger. You can feel this, heroes, soldiers are coming back into the graves. Every day we'd have a new funeral at one point in our city, and our city is only 200,000 people. It's not a big city. And so these events and these situations, they shape a new sort of mindset onto people, to free ourselves from this Russian oppression, the shackles of Russian oppression, Russian influence. And the last 8 years, Ukraine has, we have made important decisions, countrywide decisions that tilt and push us further into the Western world, into EU integration, etc. And so Russia has lost, they were losing a lot of their influence in Ukraine, a lot of pro-Russian, if you want to call it that, pro-Russian people turned away from this so-called Russian world, Ruski Mir, and they decisively picked to, be part of Ukraine. And yeah.
Was there anybody that you knew personally that passed away in Crimea?
So Crimea was taken with no pushback from our forces. A lot of the army in Crimea actually defected into Russia.
Mm.
And at that time, as I said, our president fled, and for 3 months we had no one in charge. We didn't have a government. We had an interim president, and all our security services, our army, were implanted with Russian agents. So the Russians took Crimea with one death. However, after they took Crimea in March, in April they started pushing these pseudo republics and these new pro-Russian, there's a word for it. It's called Ruski Mir. They started pushing this idea of Malorussia, and it's translated into small Russia, and they wanted to create a new republic on the south and east Ukraine called Malorussia. And that was a war where up to now 13,000 people died. We do know a family friend that passed away. He stepped on a mine. His whole body, had to be stitched back together for the funeral. They came back to our city. He was, the whole town was parading for the funeral, and every soldier they greeted back like a hero. They're fighting for Ukraine, for our freedom, for our independence, and for our identity. May he rest in peace. This was in 2016.
What's his name?
His name was Sergei.
All right. I wanted to ask you a little bit about times that you remember in your when you weren't thinking about the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and just kind of you mentioned some about working on the farm with your helping your uh, grandmother on the farm, but just everyday things, hobbies that you had, time you spent with your friends, good memories that you had that you really feel like you associate positive things and great things with your country and your town.
Of course. Growing up, I played a lot of chess. My godfather, he ran the chess school, so since I was like 4 years old, he'd play chess with me, teach me new openings, new systems. In terms of with my friends, I used to like to play tennis, football, of course, very popular, after school. But more, I look at that time as just, this worry-free time, this, when you're growing up, you don't think about the geopolitical situation in your country and in your region. So I guess a lot of the positive memories are from this lack of awareness about what's going on in our country. We've had problems in our country for, they never stop. Corruption is still rampant in our government, and it has been since our independence. So I look more at that time as positive, because of nostalgia, and also because when you're a kid, you don't worry about the problems.
It sounds like you guys had to grow up faster than most people did, and had to deal and think about those problems a lot.
No, this is for sure. Especially 2014. That's changed like everything, to be
And
honest.
we're
I was already studying here in 2014, so every time I'd come back on holiday to my family back home, you just go into a completely different world, completely different situation,
mm,
and you come back to England after, and it's almost like a different reality. People back in Ukraine, you see pensioners struggling to pay for the basic necessities of life, such as food, such as electricity, kommunalka. And I came back to England, and it's like a different reality. Kids are kids are still kids.
Yeah.
You're 14, 15, and here the problems are more about what's what I don't know. I don't know what example to give, but the problems are a lot
The
less.
everyday things are not, great things that
Exactly,
life or
exactly,
death.
exactly. In Ukraine, it was about life and death. It was about our country surviving this war, and our country, staying sovereign and independent. And you see funerals and bodies coming back every day, and it's like it's heartbreaking. Your heart literally drops to your stomach, and you do have to grow up a lot faster because the problems there are a lot severe. You have to take a lot more, you have to be a lot more independent and responsible for your decisions.
Mm. Um, okay. What are you studying right now, by the way?
Economics.
Economics.
Yeah.
And what made you want to study economics?
So growing up, I would say a lot of I was playing chess. I was, always enjoyed math. Then the 2008 crisis came, and it hit Ukraine especially hard. It hit our family especially hard because
Mm,
the real estate prices, they lost 70% of their value, etc. And I always wanted to understand the processes that cause these sort of events to happen. Um, so at school I was good at math. I enjoyed math, so I decided to do economics. Yeah.
Partly to because you understand your family situation and help them.
Maybe deep down, the way I thought about it at the time was I'm good at maths. I'm interested in economics. Where my interest in the economy started probably has roots in this.
Mm,
But at the time, when you're 18, you're still kind of trying to decide your future. You're not really sure what you
yeah.
want to do. Economics seemed like a good choice.
Mm. Um, I forgot to ask you earlier, but I want to go back to Lutsk, and I was wondering if you
Mhm.
could uh, tell people a little bit about you know just your city and what it means to you and what you remember most about it, and because I think most people, they probably don't, the average person in the West doesn't know that much about.
Of course, it's a standard provincial city. Working class people, middle class people. Nothing. We don't really have any attractions, tourist attractions. We have a famous tower in Ukraine called Zamok Luberta. Um, that's like a tower from 500 years ago. It still stands, but apart from that, honestly, it's just a standard provincial city in Eastern Europe. There's nothing. There's nothing crazy about it. It's just its home. So
Yeah.
this is where I went to school. This is where I went to kindergarten. and when you go back and you go down memory lane a little bit, the city doesn't, it doesn't change as fast as London, for example. So when you go back, a lot of the stuff stays the same. And so you go back and you almost like start reminiscing about, oh, I was playing football here. It's just it's a trip down memory lane a little bit.
Yeah. And then I guess the same question in summary about Ukraine, and if you could give, in a brief word, or a brief couple words, couple phrases, what Ukraine means to you.
That's a very difficult question. For me, Ukraine is freedom and its hard will to stay free, because our whole history and our whole identity of Ukrainians is founded on as the underdog against the big Goliath from the east, against the oppressor. So a lot of our history was just us fighting for our freedom and us fighting for our right to self-determination. So in one word, I would say Ukraine to me means freedom. Yeah,
Freedom.
I would say this is, and finally the Western world can see that Ukrainians will fight to be free. They will die for their country's freedom. And what's happening now is it's a heartbreaking situation. But in these sort of situations, you see the best of humanity and you see the worst of humanity at the same time on show.
Yeah. No, it's definitely, there's so many people who have said that, I mean, one I can give is Dante said, in times of moral conflict, those who remain neutral,
Exactly.
hottest, place in hell is reserved to those who remain neutral. All right, so I think we've caught up to the present day. I want to ask you, for my purposes and for the sake of everybody listening, what needs to be done more now? What more can, we see all the news on, everybody who's following it. What more can we do to help Ukraine? Well, let's start. What more needs to be done in general, and then we'll go to what more can individuals, the average person, do.
So in general, from the side of the governments and from the Western world, they woke up to this threat very late. Eastern European countries have been raising awareness against the Russian threat for the last 15 years, for the last 20 years even. We let Georgia 2008 happen, where Russia just came in and started a war on a tiny country. Then we let Russia get away with annexing Crimea and starting a new proxy war in eastern Ukraine. And every time in both these scenarios, the Western world, Germany, especially I'm looking at Germany, they gave Putin a slap on the wrists, but kept trading with Russia, kept being dependent on Russian energy. And Ukrainians have said for the last 10 years that this dependency on Russian energy is used as a geopolitical weapon. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the whole idea by setting up this pipeline from Russia to Germany was that it circumvents the current pipeline into Europe that goes through Ukraine. And it's used as a geopolitical weapon because, first of all, it increases German dependency on the pipeline. And second of all, all the gas goes through the second pipeline, so Ukraine gets no transition fees. And those are like $4 billion a year. They are like a substantial part of our budget. So I just want to say we have been warning the Western world about this Russian aggression threat for the last decades, and nobody listened. And this is where your quote comes in very handy. If you're neutral in times of hardship, then
I think I screwed it up earlier. It's the hottest
place in hell is reserved for those
who remain neutral.
That's it. So what now? Finally, it took a Russian invasion for the Western world to wake up to this, to wake up to Putin and to his foreign policy and to his general view. I would say Putin operates a fascist regime, a fascist state. Finally, we see proper sanctions against the Russian regime, against the Russian economy. What I would want to see more from the Western world and their leaders is either no-fly zone. I understand that they're scared to set up a World War III because it does lead to potential escalation. Okay, I understand that. If they don't want to set up a no-fly zone, then we need our own jet fighters. We need air defense systems, and right now we're not getting those.
Right.
So I urge the Western leaders to arm us and give us the weapons we need to help us so that we can defend ourselves. And by defending ourselves, we defend the Western values and the freedom that comes with the idea of the Western world. And we defend the rest of Europe. Because if Ukraine falls, make no mistake about it, if Ukraine falls, then Moldova is next, then Georgia is next, then Armenia is next, and then eventually it'll be the Baltics, Poland, and NATO itself. So they need to understand this.
And when, not if, when Ukraine wins,
When Ukraine wins.
what can the West do to help to prevent another escalation of a conflict and another potential military escalation from Russia from happening? What can the West do to prevent it and put an end?
Yeah, so when Ukraine wins, we are gonna need to rebuild our country. We will need a new Marshall Plan. We're gonna need a lot of assistance to help rebuild all the infrastructure, all the damaged cities that some have been wiped off the map. So first of all, we need to rebuild Ukraine and make Ukraine a strong nation. But more so, to prevent Russian aggression of happening in the future, we need to be part of a defense pact, or we need security guarantees. Because Ukraine's not in NATO, we are isolated, so we are very, very vulnerable to Russian aggression. Because Russia knows if they can come in, NATO does nothing, they can do whatever they want in our country. And that's what happened here. You know, in 2008, Georgia and Ukraine were rejected by NATO because Germany vetoed it. US and UK wanted us to be part of NATO to create this buffer against Russian aggression. Germany vetoed it, and look what's happened since that time. Georgia was invaded, Crimea was annexed, Ukraine was invaded in 2014. Our eastern regions were invaded in 2014, and they set up these new proxy republics. And in now 2022, I hope that they finally learn this lesson, that supporting through words means nothing. We need to see action. We need to create a real defensive buffer against Russian aggression. We need to be accepted into NATO. If they don't want to accept us into NATO, then we need a new security guarantee from US, UK, Turkey maybe. But they didn't learn their lesson from Georgia. They didn't learn their lesson from Crimea. They have to learn their lesson this time to prevent it from happening in the future. The only language the Kremlin understands is strength.
It's hard power, yeah.
Hard power, yeah.
All right, so last question. Apart from donating to the organization we mentioned earlier at the beginning, the organization set up by the Ukrainian Association of the UK, Great Britain, and the UK, what can the average citizen living in the UK, living in Germany, living in the US, living in Ireland, living in other parts of Europe, what can they do besides donating to help and to put themselves in a position where they are not neutral and that they're doing something?
So the average citizen, of course, donations are very, very important, but also is very important is to put pressure on Western leaders to take a hard stance. You know, we see millions of people every weekend coming out in Berlin, in Prague, in Georgia, in all over Europe, to be honest, and they put pressure on their leaders to take a hard stance. And Ukrainians see this. Ukrainians see that the civilized world is supporting us. It gives us will to fight, and it also gives impetus to the leaders to provide real assistance. So if you are not in a position where you can donate money, then please raise awareness, go to protests, put pressure on your governments, write to your local MPs, and put pressure on them to give real assistance to Ukraine. This is a battle between good and evil, and you need to be on the right side of history, you know?
Yeah, I cannot agree more. Well, finally, is there anything you want to say? I don't have any more.
Slava Ukraini!
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!
Heroyam Slava. Yes. Okay, well, man, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, man.
I
Thank you.
learned so much. I hope you guys, our listeners, learn so much, and hopefully, we can continue to have more people come on and tell their stories, because I think this was very instructive, and I think people will learn from it. So, I think that concludes it, right?
Yes, Ukraine will be free, and we will prosper.
We'll win.
We will win, yes.